They told him the fire took everything, his legs, his brothers, and the wild Mustang that was more a part of him than his own shadow. For 3 years, Ethan Ward lived in the shell of a life on the Montana plains, a ghost haunted by smoke and memory. The world had moved on, but he was still trapped in the flames, still hearing the scream of his horse as it vanished into the inferno. Then came the call. A stormy afternoon, a crackle on a line that hadn't rung in months. A rescue ranch nearby. They had a Mustang, wounded, scarred, and grey as ash. He told himself it was impossible. Hope was a fool's game, a cruel trick of the heart. But he went anyway. What he found in that dusty stall wasn't just a horse. It was the last piece of his soul, the one he thought had burned away with everything else. And when their eyes met, after 1,000 days of silence, the man who had forgotten how to live remembered everything. But their story, the real story, was just beginning. The wind on the high plains had a bite to it that day, carrying the scent of sage and coming snow. At Dusty Creek Ranch, the world was fading to grey. The golden grass was brittle, the maple leaves were rust, and the paint on the ranch house had long surrendered to the sun. The place was a skeleton, leaning in the wind, groaning under the weight of silence. What was once a home for men and horses was now just a refuge for ghosts. Inside, Ethan Ward sat in his wheelchair, a mug of cold coffee in his hands. He was 43, but the silver at his temples and the stillness in his eyes told a different story. He was a Marine, built for endurance, a man who had walked through 2 wars and never broke. Until the blast. Kandahar. A flash of white light that tore the world and his legs apart. He'd come home with the desert inside him. The explosions, the smoke, the noise that never stopped. The doctors called it PTSD. He just called it Tuesday. His world was the hum of his chair, the ache in his phantom limbs, and the same journal entry day after day. Day 742, still here. On the wall hung a photo. A younger Ethan in uniform beside a Mustang the color of desert ash. The horse was named Ash, and he wasn't just a horse. He was a partner, a soldier. They'd found each other on the border, a half-wild thing cornered by wire and fear. Ethan's patience had earned his trust, and together they became a single, unstoppable force. They chased smugglers through canyons and rode through storms that would have broken lesser creatures. Ash was his anchor in a world of chaos. Until the fire. It had come down from the ridges without warning, a wall of flame that swallowed the world. Ethan, still learning to walk on prosthetics, tried to get Ash into the trailer, but the horse, smelling the smoke, panicked. A broken gate, a desperate scream, and Ash was gone, swallowed by the fire. They found nothing, no tracks, no body, just a scorched halter near the ridge. Since that day, the silence at Dusty Creek had been absolute. So when the phone rang, the sound was a violation. It was Linda Morales, a vet from a town he hadn't visited in years. Her voice was gentle. "Ethan, we rescued a Mustang from the western forest line. Male, grey coat, rough shape. He's got an old scar, left side of the neck, runs down to the shoulder." Ethan's world stopped turning. He couldn't breathe. Left side, the scar from the border raid where Ash had torn free to drag him from a collapsing wall. It couldn't be. He's alive. The words were a whisper, a prayer he hadn't dared to speak in 3 years. "I don't know for sure," Linda said softly, "but he's waiting for someone. You should come and see." He hung up the phone, his hand trembling. His eyes found the old saddle on the wall, coated in dust. He took it down, the weight of it not leather but memory. He wheeled himself to the garage, hoisted his body into the old Ford truck, and set the saddle on the passenger seat like a holy relic. He was a man driving toward a miracle or a heartbreak, and he wasn't sure which was worse. The road to Pine Hollow Rescue was a climb into the clouds, the gravel crackling under his tires. The sign at the gate read, "Where the broken begin again." His chest tightened. He knew a thing or two about being broken. Linda met him at the barn, her eyes kind but cautious. "He's at the back," she said. "He won't let anyone near him. He's difficult." Ethan just nodded. "He's a soldier. Soldiers are always difficult." He wheeled down the long corridor, past stalls of nervous horses, his heart hammered against his ribs. He'd rehearsed this moment in his nightmares 1,000 times. And then he saw him. At the far end of the barn, a horse the color of a storm cloud stood in the shadows. He was thin, scarred, his head low. The silvery line of a scar was just visible on his neck. But it was the stillness that got to Ethan. Not the stillness of peace, but the coiled, waiting stillness of a predator. Ethan stopped just outside the stall. This wasn't the powerful beast he remembered. This was a feral thing, a ghost with haunted eyes. He looked wild, dangerous. There was no recognition in his gaze, just a flat, dead emptiness. Ethan's hope crumbled into dust. This wasn't Ash, this was just another tragedy, another broken thing the world had left behind. He felt a fool's shame burn in his gut. He turned his chair to leave, the squeak of the wheel a sound of defeat. "Wait," Linda said, her voice soft. "There's something you should see. A boy from town, he's the only one the horse tolerates. He just talks to him." Ethan shook his head. "It's not him." But as he started to roll away, a memory sparked. A sound, a command from long ago, whispered in the chaos of a firefight, a word just between them. He stopped, turned back and let the word slip out, barely a breath. "Heel." The horse didn't move, but one ear, just one, twitched. It swiveled back, listening. Then slowly, painfully, the horse lifted its head. It turned to face him, and the deadness in its eyes was gone. In its place was a flicker, a spark of impossible recognition. The eyes of a soldier who had just heard his commander's voice across the battlefield of years. "Ash," Ethan said again, his voice cracking, stronger this time. The Mustang took a hesitant step forward, and another. The air in the barn grew thick, charged with 3 years of unspoken grief. Ethan opened the latch and wheeled himself inside. He reached out a trembling hand. The horse lowered his head, not to nuzzle, but to press his forehead against Ethan's, a gesture of shared burdens, of absolute trust. A raw sound, half sob, half laugh, tore from Ethan's throat. "You came back," he whispered, his hand buried in the coarse mane, feeling the impossible, undeniable pulse of life. "You stubborn beast, you came back." Linda stood behind them, wiping tears from her eyes. 3 years, she whispered. "He's never let a soul touch him, but he knows you." Ethan just laughed, a broken, beautiful sound. "We both made it through the fire," he murmured into the horse's neck. "Guess that makes us even." He took him home that night, no forms, no questions. Linda just nodded, a sad, knowing smile on her face. "He's not the same horse you lost, Ethan." "Neither am I," he'd said, and it was the truest thing he'd said in years. As they drove back to Dusty Creek, the trailer rattling behind them, Ethan felt a fragile peace settle in his chest. But bringing a ghost home is one thing. Living with it is another. And neither of them knew that a different kind of storm was already gathering on the horizon, one that would test them in ways the fire never could. The first few days were a fragile truce. Ash moved through the dilapidated ranch like a phantom, sniffing the burnt timbers of the old barn, pawing at the earth where his stall used to be. He remembered, but the memory was a wound. He was skittish, wary, the ghost of the fire still flickering in his eyes. Ethan gave him space. They were two broken soldiers learning to share a battlefield of quiet grief. The silence of the ranch was no longer empty, but it was tense, filled with the things they couldn't say. Then the outside world intruded. A woman and a small boy appeared at his fence line one morning. The woman, Sarah, had tired eyes but a kind smile. Her son, Evan, couldn't have been more than 11, with a mop of curly hair and a gaze that was far too serious for his age. Sarah introduced herself as his neighbor from the next ridge over. "We saw the horse trailer," she said, holding out a basket of eggs. "Thought we should say hello." Ethan was wary. He wasn't used to neighbors. He wasn't used to people. But the boy, Evan, wasn't looking at him. His eyes were fixed on Ash, who stood watching from the far end of the paddock, muscles coiled, ready to bolt. "He's beautiful," the boy whispered, a note of awe in his voice. Ethan grunted. "He's a survivor." Sarah put a hand on her son's shoulder. "Evan, don't get too close. Mr. Ward's horse has been through a lot." But the boy was already moving toward the fence, slow, deliberate, his hand outstretched. Ash watched him, ears twitching. Just as the boy's fingers were about to touch the fence rail, Ash snorted, spun on his heels, and galloped to the other side of the field. a grey streak of fear and distrust. Evan's face fell. Sarah sighed, a look of apology on her face. "I'm sorry, Evan loves horses, but they don't always love him back." There was something in her voice, a hidden story that pricked at Ethan's curiosity. But he just nodded and accepted the eggs. He wanted them to leave. He and Ash had enough ghosts to deal with on their own. But Evan kept coming back. Every day after school, the small figure would appear at the fence, just watching. He never tried to get close again. He would just sit in the grass and talk to the horse in a low, steady voice, telling him about his day, his homework, his dreams of being an astronaut. And a strange thing started to happen. Ash started listening. He'd stop his pacing and turn one ear toward the boy's voice. He wouldn't come closer, but he wouldn't run away either. It was a start. The world shifted on a single sound, a gunshot, far off from the woods, probably just hunters. But to Ash, it wasn't just a sound. It was the crack of an IED. It was the scream of incoming fire. It was the blast. The horse exploded. He reared up, eyes white with terror, a sound tearing from his throat that was pure primal fear. He slammed against the corral fence, the old wood splintering. He was no longer a horse, he was a weapon, a storm of panic and memory. "Whoa, easy!" Ethan yelled, wheeling himself forward as fast as his arms could pump. "Ash, stand down." But Ash didn't hear him. He was back in the desert, back in the war. He kicked out, splintering another board, his body trembling, slick with sweat. Just then, Sarah's car pulled up the drive. She and Evan were bringing over a pie. They saw the chaos in the corral and froze. "Get back," Ethan roared. "He's not safe." Sarah grabbed Evan, pulling him behind her, her face pale with fear. The horse was a monster, wild, dangerous, just as she had feared. But Ethan didn't back away. He kept rolling forward, right into the path of the panicked animal. He stopped his chair just feet from the thrashing hooves, his own heart pounding, but his voice dropping to a low, steady command. "It's over, soldier. You're safe. No fire, no blast, just wind. You hear me? Just wind." The horse's chest heaved, but something in Ethan's voice, the calm authority of a man who had walked through the same hell, began to cut through the terror. Ash stopped rearing. His trembling slowly subsided. Ethan reached out a hand, slow and steady, and laid it on the horse's sweat-soaked neck. "I heard it too," he whispered, resting his forehead against Ash's. "We still flinch, huh?" From the driveway, Sarah watched, speechless. She hadn't seen a dangerous animal. She had seen two survivors, two soldiers, speaking a language she couldn't understand, but recognized all the same. She saw the bond, forged in a fire she couldn't imagine, and she felt a profound, aching respect. The fear in her eyes was replaced by something else: understanding. Later that week, as the autumn chill deepened, Sarah came over alone. She found Ethan mending the corral fence. "My husband was a firefighter," she said without preamble, her voice quiet. "He died in a warehouse collapse. Evan was 8. Ethan stopped hammering. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same shadows in her eyes that he saw in his own reflection. They were both survivors. "Evan doesn't talk much about it," she continued, her gaze drifting toward Ash, who was now calmly watching the boy draw pictures in the dirt. "He just gets quiet. That's why he comes here. I think your horse understands quiet." In that moment, something shifted between them. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were allies in a quiet war against the past. But the peace was fragile, a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold lake. Because winter was coming to the Montana plains. And with it, a storm was brewing that would demand a price far greater than broken fences. It would demand a sacrifice. And one of them was about to pay it. The wind came down from the northern ridge like a wolf, howling and clawing at the old ranch house. Rain fell in blinding sheets, turning the world to a churning chaos of gray and black. By midnight, the storm had declared war on Dusty Creek. Inside the cabin, Ethan was losing his own battle. He'd been sick for days, a deep cough rattling his chest. Now a fever burned behind his eyes. He reached for the small oxygen tank beside his bed, but the hiss was weak, fading. The gauge needle shuddered on, empty. A cold spike of fear shot through him. "Not tonight," he rasped, his voice a ghost in the roaring dark. He tried to push himself up to get to the spare tank in the cabinet, but his body was a leaden weight. He dragged himself across the floorboards, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. His fingers brushed the cabinet handle, so close, but his strength gave out. The world tilted, went black, and he collapsed beside the hearth, the storm outside the last sound he heard. In the barn, Ash felt it. Not the storm. He'd ridden through worse. It was the silence, the sudden, absolute absence of the steady rhythm of breath from the house. A deep wrongness settled in the air. He let out a sharp, questioning whinny. Nothing. He pawed the ground, his anxiety mounting. He slammed his shoulder against the stall door. The wood groaned. He hit it again, a crack splintering the planks. A third time, and the hinge shattered. The door flew open, and Ash plunged into the deluge. The rain was a physical blow, but he didn't hesitate. He wasn't just a horse anymore. He was a soldier on a mission. He galloped through the sucking mud, lightning illuminating his path, his goal a single faint light flickering on a distant ridge, Sarah's house. At the Coleman house, the windows rattled. Sarah was reading to Evan when the sound came, a frantic, rhythmic pounding on their front porch. It was impossible. No person, no animal should be out in this. She crept to the window and peered out. Her heart stopped. Ash stood on her porch, drenched and wild-eyed, steam rising from his flanks. He struck the porch again with a hoof, then threw his head back and let out a piercing cry, a sound of pure desperation that cut through the howl of the wind. "Mum!" Evan was at her side, his eyes wide. "He's trying to tell us something." Ash reared slightly, then spun and pointed his head back toward the darkness, toward Dusty Creek. He was not asking. He was commanding. "Get your flashlight," Sarah said, her voice tight with a terrifying certainty. "We're going." They followed the ghost-grey horse into the maelstrom. It was a nightmare journey through blinding rain and ankle-deep mud, the beam of their flashlight a tiny bouncing star in an ocean of black. Ash led them on, never faltering, his heavy hoofbeats a drumbeat pulling them toward disaster. When they reached the cabin, it was dark, silent. "Ethan!" Sarah screamed, pushing the door open. The air inside was cold, thick with the smell of a dying fire. Evan's flashlight beam swept the room and then froze. "Mom!" He was there, on the floor, motionless. His skin was a ghastly grey, his lips blue. Sarah fell to her knees beside him, her fingers searching for a pulse. It was there. Faint, thready, a tiny flicker of life in the overwhelming dark. "He's alive," she whispered, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. "Barely." The call to 911 was a frantic blur of words against the storm. "Veteran, oxygen failure, hurry." As they waited, Evan took off his own small jacket and laid it over Ethan's chest. "He's so cold," the boy whispered, his teeth chattering. Outside, Ash stood guard on the porch, unmoving, a silent sentinel in the pouring rain. He had done his part. Now he could only wait. The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the rain 20 minutes later, an eternity. The paramedics burst in, a whirlwind of urgent motion and shouted commands. "Pulse is weak. Get the O2 on him now." As they worked, one of the medics glanced at Sarah. "How did you know to come?" Sarah just pointed a trembling finger toward the porch, where the huge drenched horse stood watching. "He told us." The medic stared, then shook his head in disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned." They lifted Ethan onto the stretcher, his eyelids fluttered. Through the fog of unconsciousness, his gaze searched the darkness until it found the shape on the porch. His lips moved, forming a single silent word through the oxygen mask. "Ash." A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "Good boy," he whispered. "You saved me again." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the siren's wail was swallowed by the storm. Sarah and Evan stood in the rain, watching it go. Ash hadn't moved. He stood his post until the last echo of the siren faded, his head bowed against the wind. The storm had passed, but the world it left behind was forever changed. The hoofprints Ash had pounded into the mud, leading from a broken barn to a neighbor's door, were a testament. Sometimes the deepest bonds require no words, and sometimes a hero has 4 legs. 2 days later, the story was everywhere. It started as a headline in the local paper. Mustang saves Marine veteran. By noon, it was on the regional news, the footage of the broken stall and muddy tracks playing on a loop. The image of the weathered veteran, hand resting on the neck of his grey horse, captured the hearts of 1,000 strangers. And then the impossible happened. People started showing up. A car would pull up the long dirt road to Dusty Creek. Someone would get out, leave a bag of apples or a bale of hay by the fence, and drive away. A local school kid left a hand-drawn card that read, "To the horse who heard what we couldn't." A group of bikers, all veterans themselves, roared up one afternoon, not with threats, but with tools. They spent the entire day rebuilding the corral fence, stronger than it was before. They didn't say much, just clapped Ethan on the shoulder, nodded at Ash, and rumbled away, leaving behind the smell of leather and respect. The ranch was no longer a place of isolation. It was becoming a landmark, a symbol. The story took on a life of its own when Evan wrote an essay for his class. His teacher had asked them to write about a real-life hero. Evan didn't write about a firefighter or a soldier. He wrote, "My hero is a horse." He wrote about a creature who came back from the fire to save a man who had forgotten how to live. "He is brave because he doesn't know how not to be," the essay concluded. "And he taught me that sometimes heroes have hooves." The essay went viral, shared from the school's social media page to community forums and beyond. The story of Ethan and Ash was no longer just a local tale, it was a modern legend. One afternoon, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up the drive. A young deputy named Ryan Carter stepped out. "Sir," he said to Ethan, removing his hat, "I looked you up. Afghanistan, Silver Star." Ethan just nodded, his eyes on the horse. "You used to save lives," the deputy continued quietly. "Looks like you still do, just with a different kind of partner." For the first time in years, a real unguarded smile touched Ethan's lips. "This one doesn't talk back," he said. "It's an upgrade." But with the fame came a new, unforeseen threat. A man named Silas Croft saw the story on the news, hundreds of miles away. He saw the distinctive scar on Ash's neck, and a greedy light sparked in his eyes. Years ago, before Ash was a wild Mustang on the border, he'd belonged to Croft, a cruel rodeo trainer who had starved and beaten him, leaving that very scar with a barbed wire whip. Croft had abandoned the horse in the desert, leaving him for dead. Now he saw his meal ticket. He hired a lawyer and filed a claim. The horse, he argued, was his property, stolen from him years ago. He had branding papers, old and faded, but legal. The news hit Ethan like a physical blow. A summons arrived, a court date was set. The law was clear. Branding papers were proof of ownership. The town that had rallied around him now felt helpless. They had rebuilt his fence, but they couldn't fight the law. It looked like the man who had survived a war and a fire was about to lose the one thing that brought him back to life. He was about to lose Ash, not to a storm, but to a piece of paper. The very community that had celebrated their story was about to watch it be torn apart. The thought of Ash back in the hands of a cruel man was a horror Ethan couldn't bear. The ghosts were back, and this time they were whispering of a final, unbeatable defeat. The mood at Dusty Creek turned somber. The stream of visitors with gifts of hay and apples slowed to a trickle. A cloud of dread hung over the ranch, thicker than any storm. Ethan grew quiet again, the life that had returned to his eyes dimming with each passing day. He would sit on his porch for hours, watching Ash, a terrible grief already taking root in his heart. Sarah and Evan tried to keep his spirits up, but the legal papers on his kitchen table were a constant, damning presence. Deputy Ryan Carter came by again, his face grim. "Ethan, this guy Croft, his papers look legitimate. The brand matches. Legally, our hands are tied. He's a snake, we all know it, but he's a snake with the law on his side." Ethan just stared out at the paddocks, his jaw tight. So that's it. After everything, he just takes him. It felt like the final, cruelest twist of fate. A man had found his soul again, only to have it legally repossessed. But they had underestimated the power of the story they had created. They had underestimated Evan. The boy had been quiet, watching the adults talk in hushed, defeated tones. And then he had an idea. He took his school essay, the one that had gone viral, and he started a petition. He called it a hero's home. He went door to door, then to the local grocery store, the post office. He stood on street corners. He told everyone who would listen the story of the horse who ran through a storm, of the bond that healed a soldier. He wasn't just asking for signatures, he was reminding them of the miracle they had all witnessed. The town responded. The petition filled up, then another and another. The local news station got wind of it and ran a follow-up story, not just about the horse, but about the boy fighting to save him. The story exploded again, this time with a new, urgent angle. Justice for Ash. The TV station's phone lines were flooded. The sheriff's office was inundated with calls from people across the state, demanding that something be done. The pressure mounted. The judge overseeing the case, a stern, by-the-book man, couldn't ignore the public outcry. He agreed to hear testimony not just about ownership, but about the animal's welfare and its unique role in the community. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Silas Croft was there, smug and confident, his lawyer by his side. Ethan sat in his wheelchair, Sarah on one side, Evan on the other. Linda Morales was the first to testify, providing veterinary records of Ash's condition when he was found. Malnourished, covered in old scars, a clear victim of long-term abuse. Croft's lawyer tried to dismiss it as irrelevant. Then Deputy Carter took the stand. He spoke of Ethan's service record, of the Silver Star, and of the profound change he had witnessed in the man since the horse's return. "That horse didn't just save his life in a storm, Your Honor," Carter said, his voice ringing with conviction. "He saved him from the war he brought home." But it was Evan who turned the tide. The judge, seeing the boy in the front row, called him forward. He was nervous, his voice small in the big room, but he looked the judge right in the eye. He didn't read his essay. He just spoke from the heart. "Mr. Croft says Ash is his property," Evan began. "But property doesn't run through a storm for you. Property doesn't teach you how to be brave when you're scared. Ash isn't property. He's Ethan's partner. They belong together." There was a silence in the courtroom so profound you could hear a pin drop. The judge looked from the boy to Ethan, then to the smirking face of Silas Croft. He cleared his throat. "While the branding papers do indicate prior ownership," he began slowly, "this court also recognizes the overwhelming evidence of past animal cruelty and abandonment. Furthermore, under this state's laws regarding companion animals in service to veterans, this court finds that the bond between Mr. Ward and this animal constitutes a unique and essential therapeutic relationship." He looked directly at Silas Croft. "Your claim is denied. Custody of the horse known as Ash is hereby permanently granted to Ethan Ward." A roar erupted in the courtroom. Sarah hugged Evan so tightly he could barely breathe. Ethan wheeled himself over to the boy and put a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a hell of a soldier, kid." They had won. Justice, delivered not by a law book, but by the heart of a community and the courage of a boy. As they left the courthouse, they walked out into the sunlight, free. They were going home, not just to a ranch, but to a future they had all fought for and won together. The fire was finally, truly, out. The victory in court was more than just a legal decision, it was a beginning. The story of the town that saved a hero horse transformed Dusty Creek Ranch. Ethan, with Sarah and a now teenage Evan by his side, officially founded the Second Chance Ranch. It wasn't just for horses anymore. It was a sanctuary for veterans, for troubled kids, for anyone who felt the world had left them behind. They built new barns, the wood fresh and smelling of pine. The herd grew. Each new horse that arrived was broken in some way, abandoned, abused, forgotten. And Ash, the silent patriarch, was their teacher. He taught the fearful to trust again, not with commands, but with his quiet, unwavering presence. He taught the aggressive that stillness was a greater strength than rage. Veterans suffering from PTSD would come and simply stand in the pasture with him. The silence between them more healing than any therapy. The ranch became a place where the broken could heal the broken. 15 summers passed. The ranch thrived, a testament to the power of a single bond. Ethan, now in his late 60s, still sat on the porch every morning, though he leaned on a cane instead of sitting in a wheelchair. His hair was white, his face a map of a life fully lived. Ash was older too, his grey coat faded to a soft silver. He moved slower, but his eyes were as clear and steady as ever. He was a living legend, the spirit of the ranch. Evan, now a young man, ran the day-to-day operations. He had the same kind eyes as his mother and the same quiet strength as the man who had become his mentor. He would lead groups of visitors, telling them the story that had started it all. One golden evening, as the sun set behind the ridge, Ethan sat on the porch, Ash resting his head on his lap. The old soldier and the old horse, their duty done, at peace. Evan stood at the fence line, watching them, a small smile on his face. The legacy was safe. The miracle of Dusty Creek wasn't a single event. It was a quiet, enduring promise that even after the fire, after the storm, after the fight, what is truly good and brave can never be broken. That some bonds are forged for eternity. Thank you for staying with us for this incredible story. We're moved by the journey of Ethan and Ash, and we want to know what part moved you the most. Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of hope and resilience, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support allows us to keep sharing these amazing tales.